have a birthday coming up, and there's been these stories that are kind of bouncing around in my head, and they won't let go. Like, I've been thinking a lot about Cindy Kerseborn. So if you don't know who she is, she's one of the women that's painted on the outside of the Black Archives. She was a journalist who spent the last 2 decades of her life taking the Caribbean writers who were like completely ahead of their time when she was a teenager and bringing them to a new audience. In fact, one of those writers, Astrid H. Romer, actually became the first Caribbean woman to win the 2 highest prizes in Dutch literature. And I've been thinking a lot about Anna Romersdotter. She was a 17th century poet who was like in with like it was called the Moudenkring. It was like the very cool kids of Amsterdam art in the 17th century, 1600s. And so she was part of the Moudenkring, and then she turned 40 and she was like, I'm out. She converted to Catholicism, she moved out of Amsterdam, and then she spent the rest of her life translating female poets between Dutch and French so that these female poets could share their work with each other. And I probably, some of you probably already figured out what was my subconscious was doing. I'm slow, I didn't. But there was one story that not only helped me figure out what was bothering me, but made me feel better about it. So I'm gonna tell you that story. When an army attacked, it was foretold by rumors and whispers. But the raiders were terrifying because they would appear in the middle of a clear day and turn the village to blood and fire. Isabell lived on the border of a disputed land, and in some ways what she experienced we still see today. But one thing that was very different for 15th century peasants like Isabell was there was no information. She didn't know why England kept invading France, but she did know that every time their invasion faltered, the rich people would go back to England and they'd leave soldiers and mercenaries just there. And they turned into these violent gangs that would just wander through the countryside. So Isabell kept her daughters close. She couldn't keep her sons from working in the field with their father, but she would not let her daughters out of her sight. She kept them with her, teaching them spinning and weaving and embroidery and teaching them about God because Isabell was a deeply, deeply religious woman. And as was bound to happen, at some point, the war got through. She was lucky. She and her family survived this attack, but she couldn't protect her daughters from the smoke and the stench and the sight of their neighbor's death. And after this attack, something happened to Isabell's youngest daughter. She just kind of folded in on herself as if she was listening to something that wasn't really there. And she started spending all this time in the village church. And the village church was dominated by this ugly stained glass. Isabell hated it. It was left by like someone and thankful for some healing, 200 years ago. But it was an image of St. Catherine. And the way they do saints back then is they show the saint with the thing that killed them. And St. Catherine was decapitated. So it was this ugly stone glass of a very small girl holding a very large sword. Isabell thought there were enough of swords in their lives. They didn't need it at church. But Joan kept staring at it. It was like she was entranced. And at some point, when Joan was 15, she was just gone. And then the rumors started, but this time, the rumors that were reaching Isabell were about her own daughter. And someone came into the village in clothing that she had never seen before. I mean, peasants in France at this time period, you don't go more than like 5 miles from the place that you're born. None of them had ever seen velvet before, or brocade, or even colors this bright. And this guy goes up to their farm, and he says that their daughter Joan is with the king, that she's leading an army, that she's going to save Orléans, the major city in the area. And this is ridiculous. She's a 15-year-old girl, right? And the messenger goes, and the rumors start up again. And all Isabell and her husband can do is just wait. And they hear rumors that it's true, that Joan freed Orleans, that suddenly a tide is changing. And I mean, who knows if this is actually true? People say everything. Like, people say that Joan was lifted up into heaven and like cast lightning bolts down on the English. But there's so many people telling this story that Isabell and her husband start to wonder, is this maybe true? And then someone shows up on a horse, and the horse is better dressed than the guy that came before. And he says that the king has decided that they are now noble. This peasant woman who can't read and has spent her entire life in fear of any man with power is now hearing that she's noble? But then nothing changes. They just stay there until Romee. And the rumors come back to them. And of course, again, it's this mix of rumors, like, you know, Joan has driven the English into the sea, Joan, like, locked the Burgundian Duke up in a tower, but gradually all the other rumors die away. And the only rumors reaching them are about Joan's captivity. And then even those rumors are replaced by stories of heresy and witchcraft. And then they're replaced by the stories of Joan's death. And through it all, Isabell and her husband stay in this tiny village. They never hear from the king again, of course. And then when Isabell is 63 years old, now this is a time where 50 is a really old woman. When she's 63 years old, her husband dies. Her daughter is already dead in childbirth. Her sons are established. So this 63-year-old woman decides that she is going to clear her daughter's name. And she moves to Orleans. And the memory of what her daughter did gets her before the highest authority in Orleans. And that highest authority gets her before the next highest authority. And step by step, slowly by slowly, this very frail, very, very old, illiterate woman gets herself before the Pope. The highest power in Europe, the person who has a direct connection to God. She gets herself before the Pope and she begs him, she implores him, and she demands that the Pope clear her daughter's name. And when the trial finally starts, she is so old and so frail that she's literally having to pull herself into the room, but she is not going to miss a single moment of it. She is going to see her daughter's memory cleared. And she does. And so this is the story I've been thinking about. And as I'm writing this out, I'm realizing exactly what's been bothering me and why these women are floating around in my head. Because it's a very strange thing to get older as a feminist woman. Because I already had that fight with myself many, many years ago about whether my value comes from whether or not I'm pretty. And it took a while, but I'm good. And so I didn't expect that change to really affect me. But what I've been noticing is that I'm becoming invisible. And I know I'm standing in front of all of you and you hear me, but this is not the normal situation. And I thought, well, maybe it's because I'm a foreigner, but then I live with a male foreigner, and people see him, and they hear him in a way that they don't see and hear me. And to be clear, I'm not talking about come-ons. I'm so fucking glad that I don't get catcalled anymore. I'm so glad that I don't have what I think is a friendly conversation suddenly getting sandbagged. I'm so glad to not have random acquaintances and coworkers and people that I can't just be like, what are you doing to? I'm so glad to not have them hitting on me anymore. But it is very strange to notice the way in which, as I get older, people in public, people in stores, coworkers, random acquaintances, it's very strange to notice the way in which you're seen less and you're heard less. And so as I'm trying to process this and trying to say, okay, I'm younger now than I'm ever going to be again, so what am I going to do about this? I've been thinking about Joan, and I've been thinking about Isabell, and I've been thinking about Cindy Kerseborn, I've been thinking about Anna Romersdottir, and all these women who have spent the end of their lives doing something incredible. If Isabell Romee, a very old and frail peasant woman, can get her ass before the Pope, there is nothing that we can't do. So I'm going to take that with me, and I invite you guys to do as well.